Hi friends, this is Ethan Sawyer, aka College Essay Guy. My goal is to bring more ease, joy, and purpose into the college application process. And welcome to the podcast, where it's my job to interview some of the most brilliant minds in the college admissions field, analyze their genius, break it down for you into a series of practical, actionable steps that you can take, whether you're applying to college or helping someone else apply. But sometimes I don't even have to break it down for you into practical, actionable steps because my guest, whom you'll meet shortly, has already done it. My guest is Marie Bigham. She is the co-founder of the admissions community Cultivating Equity and Peace Today. ACCEPT for short, an online space with 5,000 members. At this point, it's 5,000 members that's mobilizing college admissions professionals on behalf of marginalized groups in a variety of ways. And you'll hear more about her in just a bit. But basically on this podcast, we'll be sharing things like, why you shouldn't, for example, maybe even use the word ally. How do you stand up for others, even when, or especially when it's most uncomfortable? Where to find a treasure trove of resources on racial equity, and 10 specific ways that counselors and colleges can help build a more inclusive environment on their campuses. The 30 tips that Marie is going to share, some of them are going to be specific to counselors, some of them are going to be specific to colleges, and then the ones at the end are specific for everyone. These are practical things you can do right away. Here we go. Hi, friends, and welcome. My guest today is Marie Bigham. Marie is the founder of ACCEPT. That's the admissions community Cultivating Equity and Peace Today, a social media-based action group for the admission profession, which recently received the Excellence in Education Award from NACAC. For y'all who don't know, that's the National Association of College Admissions Counseling, and was honored by Facebook at the 2017 Facebook Community Summit. Marie has over 20 years of experience in the profession. She served on the board of directors for NACAC, vice chair of the board of the Association of College Counselors in Independent Schools, which is ACCESS, on the board of directors of Texas Association of basically TACAC, and also in her not so spare time works as a counselor at Isidore Newman School in New Orleans. So welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So what are you up to in Los Angeles? What are you here for?
I did not fly in just to record this, although that would have been fun. I'm here because I just finished attending the CERPP conference, and CERPP stands for the Center for Enrollment Research, Policy, and Practice, which is hosted at USC. It is a think tank and research center for admissions, and this year's theme was race and identity in the admissions process. So I was one of the speakers, which is a huge honor. But really, for me, it was such a cool, brand new experience because this is a group of folks who talk about our space of college admissions and this topic specifically through lens of research and data and historical context. And it's a very academic type experience, which is very different for me. And
learning, hashtag learning.
So much learning and feeling at times a little intimidated and feeling at times like, no, I'm doing the right thing. But
what are you noticing as you're there in this community?
Oh my gosh, this community, we had a bunch of really talented academic researchers talking about this work. And what I found incredibly impressive is that they're all pretty young. They're all very, very, very smart and very creative in how they're approaching these issues of race and identity and equity in college admissions. And what I love so much, I don't know if this is specific to the topic or if CERPP and Jerry Lucido just did a great job in thinking about it this way. It was mostly people of color and younger people of color who were presenting their research. And so it was really clear that for them, this topic wasn't just an intellectual exercise, but rather something that was deeply important to them and something that was personal and real. So it was so cool. My brain broke in half a gazillion times. It was really cool.
One of the things you mentioned just briefly as we were jamming is seeing the numbers, seeing the data.
Oh my gosh. Seeing the data and really drilling in, because I think we know the stories, we know the anecdata, right? We've got the stories, but these folks were able to show with qualitative analysis through research, through surveys that, things like, hey, if you have more students of color at a community, there might actually be fewer incidents of bias happening on the campus, things like that. It was just really cool. It was cool to stretch my brain in different ways. And I'm just always trying to learn more because for as much as I think I know about admissions and about these issues, I don't know everything. And it's was great. It was great to meet new people. It was great to engage in different conversations.
Lovely.
And the weather's beautiful out here.
It is. It is
It
nice.
is.
Maybe we don't have the cold wave.
The vortex.
All right. So to set context, we're going to do 30 tips or resources in 30-ish minutes. The title for this is 30 Ways to Center Equity and Justice Today. Marie, take us on.
All right. We're going to do this. We're going to do this fast, but all the resources are going to be available and you're going to be able to dig into this yourself. So we're going to do this quick. Number one, first hint. I'm going to ask all of us to consider not using the word ally. I think that's something that everyone does, and they say proudly, I'm an ally. I stand by my friends. You get the t-shirt or the coffee mug. I'm an ally. You get the safe spaces sticker on your door. And I'm suggesting we not use that word because instead I just want you to do the work. Just do the work.
Why? What's problematic about that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think what happens with a lot of people, and this is somewhat of a criticism, is that we get so attached to the title of I want to be a good ally that we forget to do the work that follows that. Just because you say that doesn't mean you're actually putting yourself out there and taking a stance and sharing your privilege and your voice, or engaging in difficult conversations and making hard decisions. And so rather than embrace the title and rather than putting on the cape, I would ask you just to do the work. And if someone tells you you're a good ally, then wear that as a badge of pride.
Love it.
Number one. Number two, this is a philosophical thing, but I hope that we all really learn the difference between diversity and equity. And that's, I think, a first step in being good at this work. To me, diversity is about counting people and checking boxes and numbers, whereas equity, that's much harder, but equity is about changing the culture. Equity is about diving in and again, doing that work instead of just counting bodies.
Do you remember that dance and party analogy?
Yes.
So diversity is being invited to the party. Right. Equity is being asked to dance. I love that.
To me, justice, which is really my ultimate goal, is being the DJ, is throwing the party.
Wow.
I want to be the DJ.
You just took it to the next level.
Well, thank you. All right. Number three, I want to make sure that everyone here is registered to vote. And what a tricky and interesting topic in this country right now, because in theory, we think our voices and it matters one vote for one person, and there's too much evidence out there right now that maybe that's not true. However, it's still a right that every one of us in the United States really needs to exercise if we're able to, because too many outstanding people aren't able to. We need to stand up and be counted and make our voices heard and show up with the polls, not just big national years, every year. Every cycle, every time there's something to vote for. Your school board, that's where the decisions happen. Those local elections, those are critically important. It's not just the presidential cycles. It's every single time that you can share your voice, you need to vote. Okay, that's number four. This is a biggie, and this requires a little bit more work from all of us, but I think it's critical. Remember I said don't use the word ally and don't put that cape on? Number four is a little different, and that's become a really good, effective, supportive bystander. Do some bystander training. So here's an example. The terrible, terrible story of the actor Jussie Smollett last night, 2 nights ago, getting beaten within an inch of his life while people were screaming racial epithets at him and homophobic things and pouring bleach on his skin. What is bystander training? That's stepping in. Now, that's a really dangerous experience, right? But if, let's say there you are, you're on the subway and someone's just harassing the person standing next to you. Bystander training is how do you deflect? How do you step into that while keeping yourself safe and the person who's being victimized safe? But how do you step into that to disrupt the moment, to make it safer? Bystander training, there's so much good information, and the document we're sharing will have, I think, some of the best information about that. These next couple are about resources that I think everyone should share. Everyone should read and everyone should dig into daily if you can. Hechinger Report. So this is a not-for-profit organization that produces a newsletter, but also produces original research that focuses on inequity and injustices in the K through 20 education system in the United States. They have data, they have stories, they have just such a wide range of information, and it is incredibly eye-opening, and it's meant for the public to read. So it's not like a wonky educator type thing, but it's So helpful, and some of the best writing about this that you'll receive. Number 6, Teen Vogue. If you are not reading Teen Vogue every day, then you don't know really what's going on out there in the different movements for equity. Teen Vogue right now is the voice of the resistance, just the same way that park rangers are saving us. So is Teen Vogue. It's some of the best, most timely, most up to the minute and sophisticated discussion and reporting about inequities all over the world from a lot of lenses. More focused in the United States, that's number 7. Everyone needs to subscribe to the New York Times race-related newsletter. It's a weekly newsletter that aggregates the New York Times coverage about race and identity from the week. But not only does it share the articles specifically, but it also gives a very thought-provoking commentary and analysis and gives the context for how this moment, this incident, whatever they're covering, came about. Number 8, and this is the last newsletter I'm going to tell you to subscribe to because I know our email inboxes are ugly. And that's Blavity.com, Blavity.com. Blavity gives some of the best insight into what the thoughts and experiences of Black millennials. It's funny, it's smart, it's satirical, it's insightful. If I might give a plug, it is written by an alumna of my alma mater, Washington U, and it's just, you'll laugh, you'll cry. You'll want to see it again and again.
I'm going to set up the next one so you can take a sip of water.
Thank you.
So one of the questions that I have is like, as someone who will sometimes be on social media and Facebook and stuff, what do I do? How do I sort of negotiate that when I sense that someone is like something, happening, or, this is like sort of, I guess, connected to bystander training, but like, what give me some Facebook advice.
Oh my gosh. Facebook advice? Isn't that a tricky one? I think my best Facebook advice is sink into the hard conversations and get ready for them. But that leads to number 9. And this is somewhat specific to social media because it's so easy to happen here. I'm going to ask all of you to not decenter what is actually happening to marginalized people in a moment for the sake of an intellectual exercise. These terrible, terrible documentary stories about R. Kelly, right? 6 hours of just horrible things. What you don't want to do, and what I mean by the decentering, is the folks who would go online and say, but it's terrible that R. Kelly was abusive to those women. But why aren't we blaming the parents of those women? Why aren't we talking about all of the people who get abused by people? Or my very, very least favorite phrase in the world, just to play devil's advocate, because y'all, the devil don't need no advocate. When we say don't decenter what's actually happening to marginalized people for the sake of an intellectual conversation, is that what might be a very fun intellectual thought game exercise for you is incredibly painful for the people from those communities to watch unfold online. Number 10, lobby your state legislature. And you need to lobby for 2 things really specifically. A, reasonable school counselor to student ratio, which I think happened here in the LA teacher strike, right? A little bit.
Yeah, somewhat.
A little bit. And B, that we all need more funding for the state's public 2- and 4-year colleges. Our resource list will have ways that you can reach out, and that lobbying might be like literally showing up at a lawmaker's door at the Capitol. It could be sending a letter. It could be sending an email or making a phone call. But when you reach out to your elected officials and you are a constituent, they care and they pay attention. If I were to call someone here in Los Angeles, an elected official here from, and I'm from Louisiana, it doesn't matter as much. But we can all take those seconds to sign up for legislative alerts, to send that message. Those things have impact. We know that from so much legislation. We're going to give you a list and the resources of the Racial Equity Institute Bibliography. It is an enormous list of reading about history, about context, about cutting edge things, but just about why these issues matter. And if you were looking for a way to really think about this deeply, dig into that bibliography, pick out a couple of pieces that you're going to read and dive in.
The 2 that I'm reading right now, White Fragility and Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria?
The updated one?
I think so.
Yeah. What do you think so far? I know, right?
Yeah. It's actually shifting paradigms, and it's having me, actually look at the world in a different way. Yeah.
12. If you are, for whatever reason, planning a panel or a discussion group, our examples that we came up with, if you're doing a professional conference, if you're running a community meeting or something like that, if you have a gathering of people who are experts talking about a topic, make sure that at least half of those participants are women and or people of color. I think Frances McDormand called it the equity clause or the inclusion clause when she won the Oscar. As a woman of color now, I'm insisting that whenever someone invites me to speak about at a professional event or to give my thoughts, if I'm going to be with other people, I want to know that I'm not going to be the only, because that means I'm carrying a much heavier burden than the other speakers, and I want parity. So that's the demand that I'm making for someone to have the privilege of my time and expertise, sharing that stage, as sharing privilege. Number 13, stand up for others, even when, or perhaps especially when, it's uncomfortable. By that, I mean, you're having that fabled Thanksgiving dinner and everyone picks on their uncles. We're going to call it the aunties. You're there at Thanksgiving dinner and your auntie makes some really nasty, ill-informed, incorrect, biased statement, and everyone kind of looks at each other and you just hope that the auntie shuts up. No. That's your time where you need to take that stand, because what we know is that people listen to their closest peers. They listen to the people with whom they identify the most, with whom they can see their own humanity reflected. And those moments where it might be most difficult to engage in those conversations are the ones where you're going to have the most long-lasting impact. And we've given you a couple of resources about how to do that gracefully, effectively, and meaningfully. If you have someone in your family or someone who is there who believes as you do, who feels that discomfort when that person makes that biased comment, but they feel the fear of standing up, you're modeling that to them, that it's okay to do that. If you are in a space where identities are hidden, they're not obvious for perhaps like gender or race can be, you don't know the identities of the other people there. And so you taking that stand at that moment when it's difficult, you might be standing up for that person who is there and you're just not aware of it. And that's a remarkably powerful moment to feel seen and heard, and to be that someone stood up for you. So I think there are lots of reasons to do it.
God, and it takes courage, right? It takes courage to go, I'm going to be vulnerable, because there's a way that an outing has happened, and it's sort of like naming the thing that is present. And one resource that I really love from this, if you're worried about sort of like making people wrong, there's that, and that might happen. But my go-to is like nonviolent communication, like speaking to, here's the impact that phrase is having on me, and this is the way that this is making me feel, and using like simple reflective language. So if you don't know about nonviolent communication, I totally recommend it. There's an amazing book, 32 Tips, Marshall Rosenberg's Nonviolent Communication, for helping folks understand what is the impact of them on your system.
So number 14, this is something that I think every one of us can do, and it is something that just requires paying attention. When something really crappy happens in the world, reach out to your friends and families and colleagues who are members of that community that might have been harmed. So again, using the Jussie Smollett as an example, I made really intentional efforts to reach out to my friends who I know identify as queer, to reach out to my especially queer friends of color and family members to say, wow, I don't know what it's like to read a story like this and to see it over and over again, and to see the language that's being used. I can't personally fathom what it's like to receive that, but I'm here. And if you want to talk, and I want to be there for you, and just sending you a lot of love and a lot of support, and not asking anything from them, and not saying, how can I do this, or what must you feel like, just saying, this really sucks. And I know that you are feeling this more intensely and differently than I am. Just acknowledging that in the world, because I think so many times, many of us feel like when something bad happens in the world, you go to work or you go out to dinner or whatever, wherever you interact, that nobody else around you is feeling it. Now you are feeling and carrying this burden of limitation or of pain. And you're looking around like, is no one else feeling this? And that doubles it. Yeah.
We're doing pretty good. We're only
moving
5
along,
minutes
y'all.
behind.
Okay, I'm down with that. All right, so now we're going to shift to some things that if you are in a secondary school, if you are in the space where you work with students kind of where they are, and that might be independent counseling, that might be doing essay work, that might be at a school. These are some things that are kind of specific to you and your place that you can do to center equity and justice. This is if you work at a high school, and especially in a college counseling office. Anytime a college requests to meet with you to come to your school to set up a visit, my challenge to you is that you turn around and you offer them a list of other schools in your area that they might not know of. And you should include in that list contact information, make sure they're okay with this. But other schools and programs that a college rep should visit that might not be on their radar. There's a great article attached that shows that admissions offices tend to visit the same places over and over again. And I'm just as guilty of this when I worked in admissions, and then turn around and say, gosh, I don't know why I haven't seen those kids. Well, if y'all keep going back to the same place where you're not finding those kids, you're not going to find them by keep going back to the same place. So as high school counselors, I think that one of the things that we can do to help our college colleagues with that is to point them to other places that they should be seeing and meet kids not like yours.
And that seems like it takes a Google and an email. Like
pretty much.
If you don't already know who those, like which those schools are, it's like, what are the schools in my area that aren't potentially getting these visits?
Yep.
And then
if you don't know who those folks are, if you don't know those schools are, then it's incumbent upon you to reach out and make those relationships and do better about learning about your community. Number 16, and this is one that, this is a lot of work, but I'm going to put this out there. If you are a school person, you need to make sure that all of the students in your institution have equal access to honors, AP, IB programs, whatever those accelerated classes are available at your school. Pay attention to who populates those classes. And once you figure that out, you need to start asking questions as to why. Rarely are these things, nefarious or specific, or no one's sitting in a scheduling office saying, I don't think that Black kids should have access to AP physics. I really, really don't think that's happening out there. But what might be happening is that as institutions set up pathways or rules or just how you get into those opportunities, there might be barriers that they're just not aware of. And there's a great article attached here that talks about how that happens, but why this is really important in terms of preparation. And it's just good for you to know your institution that way. Number 17, as a school counselor, it is important that we know about all of the opportunities in our region. I know, because I work at a private school, I'll be honest, I would know a lot about the selective places that are in my region. I know or have known very little about two-year schools, about tribal colleges, about HBCUs, about other minority serving institutions, about trade schools, about all of those other post-secondary paths that are just as valid and important and education providing as a selective school. So one of the things that I did this academic year, one of the things I'm doing is I'm trying to visit every community college that is in my region and learning about the programs that they offer, learning about the pathways to it, learning about the transfer process if someone wants to, learning about the special programs that they should be involved with. That's been my goal. And that's been incredibly eye-opening, really, really, really eye-opening. And this makes me a better professional. I think we can all do a little bit better with that. Number 18, we need to make sure as school officials that any meeting that is intended for the caregiver of a student, that's accessible to all. And by the way, I'm trying really, really hard to not use the word parent. I'm trying really hard to do that specifically because we know that the folks who care for students might not always be their parent, and that families come in a gazillion different forms. And so I'm trying really hard to do that, to change my language, to be more inclusive of the reality of life. What do I mean by that, though, in terms of being accessible? What time of day are you offering meetings and information? If you're doing things at 10 in the morning, you're making assumptions. You're making assumptions that the parent doesn't work or someone could leave work. Make sure that there are translators, including ASL translation. I'm trying to, one of the things we're talking about at my school is providing childcare for any of our meetings, with just the acknowledgement that sometimes families can't sneak away for a meeting regardless of the time because of childcare issues, and it's really expensive. So we're trying to do that a little bit better. Is public transportation easily available? In some locations, there's not a lot, but some locations, perhaps public transportation is cut off at a certain time, or the location where you're doing something isn't friendly. We just need to try, I think, to remove any barrier for an adult who's involved in this process. Number 19, and this might be a little more specific to folks who are in independent schools or who do independent counseling or work with families of mean in general. We all got to stop assuming that very few families want information about aid and paying for college, and we need to assume that everyone is trying to figure out a way to pay for college. We don't want to further marginalize people by hosting a separate financial aid program, but that's over there. Not everyone needs that. No, just the truth and reality is that everybody needs this information. We just need to assume in every single bit of communication that every family is going to need help paying for it. And doing that, I think, marginalizes and does not marginalize and also destigmatizes that everyone needs help paying for college.
One way that I do that is by having that under the umbrella of the college list conversation. Yep. So when you're having that, when you're titling even, hey, here's what we're talking about tonight. It's like, let's talk about college list development, how to develop a great college list. Yep. And then one of the bullet points underneath that is that like weaving in the conversation about how to pay for college. So anyway.
It's just, I think it's fair. Are we ready to transition to this next one? Y'all, we're moving fast. Okay. So this next group, this is going to assume that you work at a college. That might be a 2-year, 4-year, private, public, trade, whatever, but that you are the person who's reaching out to students and recruiting. So that's the group we're talking about there. Okay. I'm gonna give big props in number 20 to Tulane University for this one. I'm really excited about this. So let me start by saying this is inspired by Tulane and by Jeff Schiffman's hard work. If you're visiting a city, let's say that you are being flown to LA to speak at a school, and it's a great independent school, and they're covering all these expenses for you to come out there to share information for their students. Take that opportunity to host another program elsewhere, away from that school, to share that same information with students who attend schools that won't have access to someone like you, and host those evening programs or weekend programs at a library, at a community center. Don't do it at private schools like mine. Don't do it at expensive hotels. Save yourself some money. And also, again, make sure that there's public transportation available to you. We need to broaden that recruitment pipeline for so many reasons, but this is also an issue of equity. Number 21, whenever you're visiting a school, ask about the culture of the school. We're saying a lot, and I think in the media, we hold colleges really accountable for incidents on their campuses. But we don't do a good enough job at holding secondary schools equally accountable. Those communities tend to be smaller, and they tend to, things that happen don't make the news as much. So if you're a college rep and you're visiting a high school, ask kids questions. Find out about the racial climate at the schools that you're visiting.
Like what kind of questions?
Ask about who's in school leadership. Where do kids hang out? If you don't see a single kid of color during your visit, find out why not. Talk to the kids, but ask them, what is it like to be in your school community? Is it welcoming? Is it warm? If you're a marginalized student, how's the school addressing that? I think that's important for us as we know our institutions. In admissions, we talk about relationships and we talk about context, right? And so as we learn about schools, we want to know the context of how percentage that go to college, what classes are offered, things like that. I think a part of that toolkit, part of that information that we're gathering needs to include, what is the school climate like? What are you supporting by going there? Number 22, this is truly one of my favorite things. And this is something that really anyone can do, but I think it's really impactful in college admissions office. And that's to do an assessment of the images in your workspace. And that could be your specific office. That could be your suite. That could be the hallways. But do an image assessment. If you are a white person, take a person of color with you and vice versa. I use my phone and I time it. And when you're with that person, walk down a hallway or wherever you're looking and time how long it takes to find a face like yours. If you and I were walking in a hallway in a high school, how long would it take to find your face as a white man versus mine as an Asian woman? I did this one time with a colleague at a school that I was visiting recently, and it took him 10 to 15 seconds.
Wow.
Upon any space we entered. It took me 48 minutes.
I mean, it's not surprising.
It's not surprising.
Surprising, not surprising. Yeah.
And at the same time, that's reflective. I'm going to brag about myself for something really quick. A lot of the students of color in my school hang out in my office, and I've tried very hard to create a space and culture where that's encouraged, and it's just a really cool thing. But I remember my first year, one of my students saying to me, I like to hang out in your office because it's the only room on campus where I see non-white faces. And that wasn't intentional by any means. And I looked around, I'm like, well, it's family pictures. It's my wedding picture. It's concert posters. But that was the first thing that she saw. She felt reflected. And so she felt safe in that room. Do the same in your own spaces. Number 23, if your college requires an application fee, is it easy to get a fee waiver? What are some of those other fees that are barriers for applicants before they even get to you? Because we know that those financial barriers, while we as adults or we of people with financial privilege might see those as small, oh, it's only $100, it's only $50. Those things add up really, really fast and in the aggregate are incredibly expensive. Yeah. And so if you have those fees, is it possible, like how easy is it to get a waiver? How easy is it for that to not be a barrier? I think colleges hate it when I say that. So like, that revenue is important. It is, but come on. So are these
what else is important?
Yeah. Equity, justice, opening doors.
Yeah.
Okay. Number 24. We're getting so close, y'all. I am so proud of this movement and excited about this movement for colleges to start taking test scores directly off of a student's application rather than going through ACT or SAT and making that a way for students to save money and to remove those barriers. If you work in admissions and you are not the boss, you need to ask your leadership, is that something that's coming up? And we have a resource of colleges that are taking self-reported test scores now, and it's a really great list, and those schools have great data about how this is an effective way of completing files and having more applicants, but removing a barrier, and it's something I would love to see happen everywhere. Last one for colleges. If you have a tour guide program, if you have an ambassador program, if you have a host program, are those groups of students reflective of your campus community? At many schools, they are not. Take a look and talk about why. What are those barriers? Talk with them. And so at my alma mater, if you wanted to be a tour guide, A, it was a volunteer position, B, it required a ton of time, and C, it was a highly selective process run by other tour guides. And so it's kind of this self-fulfilling circle. If you were a student who had a work-study job, the demands we asked of you made that work-study job not possible. And so for the privilege of being a tour guide, you couldn't have a work-study job. So you were giving up money to do something for free, and that was considered a really prestigious position. And so if there's something that's keeping your student outreach on behalf of admissions from being reflective of your campus community, you got to step back and ask why. Ask the students who are involved why, and ask the students who aren't involved why as well. Okay, number 26. Earlier I said everyone needs to register to vote. If you are that person who is going to college or the loving adult of that person, learn about the absentee voter laws in your state if your student's leaving to go to a different state, and also learn about the voter laws in that state if you are someone who's attending school there, because this is a tricky one. You want to make sure that your vote counts. You want to make sure that you're engaged always. And there are some states that are trying to take away the rights of college students from being able to vote where they attend school. There are some places that are trying to make getting absentee ballots for college students incredibly difficult. So let's say you're that kid and you're in those two states. Does this mean that you don't get to vote? Absolutely not. Make sure that you know what those options are. Number 27, similar to the question that I placed on college reps visiting high schools to learn about the culture, you all need to ask hard questions about what the culture is like at a college, because you want to know, like, you're going to live there, you're going to be there. But also this is an equity issue. And by asking those questions, you are holding places accountable. You're holding them accountable for not just being able to answer questions, but being able to defend. And truthfully, with so many incidents of bias happening on college campuses, if a school can't talk about it, then what are they doing about it? I asked the similar questions that I asked the college folks at high schools. Where do students socialize? Are they integrated when they're socializing? If there's a Greek system, is it integrated or is it very much segregated? If there's student leadership, who gets involved? Go beyond your tour guide. Go beyond admissions reps. Although asking admissions reps that question is a really interesting one. Talk with those students. Pay attention to newspapers. Pay attention to flyers. Pay attention. That's a big deal. It's a really big deal. Number 28, I am saying this in front of you, Ethan, but because I know that your answer is a good one.
Okay.
And because I know that you have a really broad audience of independent counselors who are really committed to this work. So I'm saying this so I don't feel like I'm calling out in a negative way.
Good.
If as an applicant or one of their caregivers, if you decide to hire somebody, a test prep person, an independent counselor, an essay specialist, Ask them if they're providing those services pro bono, no fee, to under-resourced students in schools. I begrudge no one for making money off of this process. I'm not that person in the least bit. But I do think that everybody has a responsibility to share their privilege and to share this information. And if you're going to hire someone, you want to make sure that they are, members of the correct professional associations and that they have experience and that they're sharing all of that with you. But a part of your checklist also should be, what kind of pro bono work are you doing and how much of it is your client base? And how are you sharing this information with people who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford you?
And if you're somebody listening and you're like, I'd love to do that, I'd love some ideas about how that works, email me and I'll share some ideas.
Absolutely. Yeah. Number 29, we're so close. Once you've done that search and once you've gone through the admissions process, now you have a skill set that somebody else didn't have. And you should share that. And some of it is as basic and straightforward and easy as donating your test prep materials or guidebooks to a local college if you're still using paper. There are also institutions that have what's called near peer mentorship, where you as a college student might be a few years older than an applicant. That's okay. You can be matched with someone. If you are an older student and you have an affinity with a community, volunteer with that community and share that information. But one of the things that's so tricky about the college admissions process is that sometimes it feels like clubby information that's just hard to get and hard to find, and that it's kind of opaque and it's difficult. Once you gain that knowledge set, share it with others, so that we can all have that knowledge base.
This is something that I haven't released yet, but I'm going to start this ambassadors program because I've met some really incredibly dynamic students who've gone through the process and have learned a ton. And they're like, I want to help out the juniors. It's a great way, by the way, if you're a student listening to this, to fend off senioritis.
Totally.
Like, it's a really cool thing to do in the January to, June time, when you're hopefully keeping your grades up and not.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Not getting into trouble.
And not getting into trouble. Or doing things that would jeopardize your application. But like giving back and finding ways to do that, if you're interested in that, soon on my website, you'll have a little thing that's called the Ambassadors Program. And it's about like equipping students with resources so that they can give, content and help students with their essays and stuff. So anyway.
Finally, even though we went over by 3, number 30 is we all need to hold our institutions accountable when a bias or hate incident occurs, and they do. Even if, and again, especially if it's not your community that's being impacted. Remember that picture that came out this fall of the young men at a high school who were doing a Nazi salute? And then there was one boy in the back who wasn't. And there was a very clear look on his face that he was not down with that. And then he went on social media and talked about his role as a bystander, his role as a person in that community, and how awful it felt to be in that space. Hold your institutions accountable. If something happens, you stand up to your peers and you stand up and you say something. And you go to the administration and you go to the teacher and you go to the people in charge and you say, that's not okay. That doesn't represent me. Whenever there's a bias incident, and institutions have that.
Bias institute, right? Name for an organization.
Like, I have thoughts. There's always the same statement. This does not reflect our values, our community. It's like, well, yes, as it happens. So clearly it reflects some aspect of it. But when an institution says that, you as the student, you as the caregiver, you say, that doesn't reflect mine, but what are we doing next? You can't just send out that statement. You can't have one diversity training. You can't do that. You have to hold them accountable. And I think a lot of this conversation that we've had today is about holding accountability, right? Holding each other accountable, holding our loved ones accountable, holding self accountable. I think that's a really big part of this work because it's those moments that slip by that normalize them, that tell people who carry the beliefs of bias that I'm not going to get called out. That's got to be okay. You agree with me because you're complicit.
Yeah. What's coming from me is like, who are you creating a safe space for?
Right.
Right? Because there is a blip that happens when a moment of bias happens that sort of is sending out, and it's like, is that okay here?
Is that okay? Here's a little moment. Like I said, I'm multiracial, and I happened at a lunch table. People were discussing whether mixed race marriages should be okay or not. And this was like 2 years ago, so I think 2016. And this was not at school. This was this was a social setting. Should it be okay? Should it be okay? And I'm standing there like, I would like to be allowed to be a thing. I would like my humanity and existence to not be an intellectual exercise, a point of conversation. But what I really needed in that very, very, very moment was for someone to say, that's not cool.
WTF.
Right. And not just because I was sitting there, but in that moment, I needed to know that. And I was incredibly heartened when someone who was a total stranger, who doesn't know me, who doesn't know my story, knows nothing, stopped and was like, that is a really rude thing to say. And here's why that's hurtful. And that made me feel really, really good and safe and supported. And I thanked that person later. And that thank you was my introduction to them. And yeah, holding each other accountable, I think, is a really big step in this conversation.
Yeah. Hi, friends. Thanks for listening. You'll find all these resources collected in a fancy, dancy PDF that you can download at collegeessayguy.com/podcast. Just click on the Marie Bigham podcast. You'll also find a link to the Facebook group. If you are a counselor who's listening to this, who wants to join ACCEPT, you are welcome. And also learn to embrace the discomfort. Thanks so much. And as always, stay curious.